Hello, and welcome to week 3 of our reading through the New Testament in 2026. We are reading 5 chapters each week to make it through the entire New Testament in 2026. This week we are focusing on Matthew's chapter 11 through 15. And again, if you want to read these all at once, you can, or if you want to break it up, say, 5 chapters is once every weekday, that's doable. But what we're going to be reading this week is Matthew 11 through 15. Now, Matthew 11 starts off with this very interesting thing where John the Baptist hears everything that Jesus is doing. He's imprisoned at this point, John is. And he hears what Jesus is doing, and he starts to have doubts. And if John the Baptist, who baptized Jesus and saw the signs, if he has doubts, then maybe it's okay that we have doubts every once in a while as well. But he asks, "Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?" And Jesus responds, "Well, John, look what's happening. The lame walk, the blind receive their sight, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up. And poor people have good news preached to them." So he doesn't outright say, "Yes, I am the one," but he's saying, look at the signs. And these signs are all things that we've read about last week that we see point to Jesus having power and authority more than any other human who has ever lived. And we stick along that kind of line about how much authority Jesus has and what are people starting to recognize about him through the rest of this week. In chapter 12, Jesus heals someone on the Sabbath, which causes an uproar among the Pharisees and religious leaders because you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. But Jesus declares that he, the Son of Man, is the Lord over the Sabbath. And then we see time and time again that Jesus talks about himself in ways about knowing who he is, that you can judge a tree by the fruit it produces. And so if he's doing good things, he must be doing it for good reasons, because even the Pharisees start to think that maybe he's possessed by a demon and that's why he has authority over demons. And he's like, that's not it at all. And then he says, I'm going to give you a sign similar to Jonah, who gets swallowed by a fish and is in 3 days in the belly of the fish. So the Son of Man will be 3 days in the belly of the earth before rising again. This is the first time that he really predicts his own death and resurrection. Now, by chapter 13, we end up in one of the most famous sections of Scripture where he starts speaking in parables. He starts giving his teachings in parables. These are stories that he tells that have an underlying meaning that show what the kingdom of heaven is like. And one of them, the parable of a sower, he actually explains to his disciples. But most of the rest of them are left open-ended for us to try and figure out ourselves. And the reason why he speaks in parables is it allows him to do a couple of different things. Mainly, it allows him to see who is really following him versus who is just interested in finding out what he's about. Because those who will follow him will look deeper into the parables and try to figure out what they mean. Now, chapter 14 takes a more sorrowful turn as we learn about John the Baptist being beheaded. And this news of John losing his life causes Jesus to want to get away from it all just for a little bit. But we see he's unable to, because even when he takes the disciples in a boat to a far off place, the crowds follow him there. And Jesus, rather than sending the crowds away because his cousin just died, says, let's give them food to eat. And the disciples don't have any food, so they have just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and Jesus takes it and multiplies it and feeds over 5,000 people that day. And then he follows this up not only with creating food essentially out of nothing, but sends the disciples ahead of him while he takes time for himself to pray, and in the middle of the night comes walking in a storm as the disciples are rowing on the lake, walking on water, which no one has ever done before. And even Peter tries to walk on the water with Jesus and does for a time before he becomes scared and starts to sink, and Jesus has to save him. And we end in chapter 15 with the clashes with the religious leaders becoming more and more apparent, where Jesus accuses them of following traditions of man instead of the commands of God. And comparing and then seeing the faith of a Canaanite woman surpassing the faith of the religious leaders. And then we close with Jesus repeating the feeding of the 5,000, but this time feeding 4,000 with 7 loaves of bread. And that's where we end for this week, with the conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees and religious leaders becoming more and more apparent.